This presentation is a synthesis of 4 U.S. patents, 4 scientific papers our group published, and more than 100 research papers used as reference. Our group decided to create this in response to the lackluster performance in suppressing the pandemic, leading to countless deaths. There was no initiative to correctly suppress the pandemic without shutting down the economy, and instead, our leaders chose to follow sloppy CDC protection rules and politicize medical and protective equipment. Elementary rules of protection and biohazard control were lost, and common sense became incredibly rare. The leaders mentioned are local councilors, emergency response directors, state governors, and those at the highest political power in both parties. Needless deaths ensued with the hope that a godly, magical vaccine would save everyone. Such is not the case. It is not a secret that the U.S. has become the most infected country in the world with respect to COVID-19. Representing only 4% of the world's population, it represents more than 20% of the global casualties. A shocking statistic. This can be briefly explained through the lack of the use of the hierarchy of controls. Whether done intentionally or not, this is unacceptable. The USA's response to COVID-19 is shocking primarily due to how much worse it fared against COVID-19 compared with China, even with the preliminary knowledge of the virus and not being caught off guard when COVID reached the U.S. Being only a quarter of China's population and population density, the U.S. should have encountered much less casualties. However, the U.S. response to COVID-19 is egregious in how a new method of protection took hold over real practical controls, resulting in a map of fully colored red. COVID-19 has become a politicized pandemic and a generator of virtual alternate realities benefiting the spread of COVID. The facts show that since December, various institutions and investors were aware of the imminent danger, and the stock market began to collapse. In Bob Woodward's book Rage, it is disclosed that the president of the U.S. knew about the pandemic propagation and death rates since January, but chose to dismiss it due to obscure reasons, while China chose to correctly apply the measures of the hierarchy of controls, successfully pushing down the pandemic through common sense. The stock market began to decrease as further news of the virus severity began to spread, and 2 months later in mid-March, it had fallen nearly 30%. Shortly following, the Federal Reserve began pumping up to $1.5 trillion into the market to combat the much-expected crash. The market began to recover, even pushing all-time highs, while COVID-19 claimed lives and local businesses were destroyed, illustrating the disconnect between the market and real economic criteria. It is believed that COVID-19 appeared in Wuhan, China in a live animal market, a similar basis to how the Spanish flu originated in Spain. The open nature of this market and proximity to an internationally funded bioresearch institute was a hot subject for organizations and states interested in promoting Chinophobia. Some studies illustrated that it was present in Italy by October 2019, about 1 month prior to China, leading to a possible connection to sudden deaths from vaping in August of 2019 in the U.S., silenced by Western media. Here we stop, because officially this is the naturally created virus, where one strain first appeared in China, and supposing that from there it spread all over the world and mutated, creating all other precursors and post-stage strains, for whom may be inclined to believe that. As Bob Woodward showed in his book Rage, by the beginning of February, the U.S. president knew almost everything regarding the virus and how it propagates and how deadly it is, evident through recordings. However, he did the exact opposite to stop it from becoming a pandemic, and the charts on the right show exactly that. It is hard to put in words what happens, and the outrageous consequences of the malevolent leadership that gifted the U.S. with unprecedented sickness rates and an unprecedented death rate which nobody has seen before. Some conservative, pro-life individuals argue that COVID was not a big deal. Supposedly, influenza infected and killed even more people and nobody cared. But when this was put on a reality check, it was observed that in fact COVID-19, or SARS-CoV-2, is by an order of magnitude more deadly than its predecessor SARS-CoV-1 or influenza. The most common path to death through COVID-19 is by pneumonia, and imaged here is the radiography of lung slices from COVID-19 and vaping, illustrating a strong resemblance, causing us to think that an e-smoking disease may have been potentially misdiagnosed. In fact, SARS-CoV-2 is a very complex virus, among the most complex we are aware of. From the point of view of genetic programming, it incorporates over 200,000 biocode instructions, more complex in their action than our actual programming code instructions, being more like widgets making vaccine development and application both difficult and risky through many yet unknown secondary effects. COVID-19 is a coronavirus, having a protein shield that holds spikes, with functions of virus propagation inside the body cells to favor its multiplication by hacking the host cell's functionality. After infecting a carrier, the virus has a period of stealth, followed by seamless development to the contagious phase, while the carrier continues to remain asymptomatic. After a week or so, the carrier becomes sick, and it then takes a few months to recover itself in the absence of clear medication. From the infected population, about 1 in 100 die. Of those who recover, they become members in the Long Haulers Club. because after they have tested negative, they still have the virus in various parts of their body that takes action from time to time, sometimes randomly giving them combinations of symptoms from the chart. Among the most dangerous seem to be those affecting the neuromotor system, rendering the person without much functionality. Among the most frequent are fatigue and muscular body aches. Nearly 100 symptoms have been identified, and the most recent are various types of psychosis diagnoses. From the very beginning, the Center of Disease Control and the U.S. COVID Task Force guidance was very sloppy and unreliable. The communication with the public was extraordinarily poor and deceptive. Leaving aside Dr. Fauci's confusing statement where he said one does not need to wear a mask if they are healthy, ignoring that asymptomatic people believe they are healthy when they are in fact contagious. With scarce and unreliable test results, the impact on society was disastrous. In the image, one may find a few examples on how poor the mask-wearing issue has been explained. In the U.S., masks became a matter of bravery, bold political statements, and disobedience. Nobody explained to the U.S. public that the use of a mask is similar to the use of car headlights. When alone on a street, a driver uses high beams, and similar may not wear a mask, but when it comes near others for courtesy and safety, a driver switches on low beams, and in a similar fashion, a citizen puts on their mask. As previously shown, nobody from the CDC clearly explained the effect of masks under the aspect of individual protection versus collectivity protection, in spite CDC knows all these facts since 1970s or earlier. In the upper picture, it is seen a smoker exhaling, and his vapors are going 8 feet in a single exhalation. Same Florida Atlantic University College of Computer Science made full movies showing exhalation vapor propagation, with various types of masks and without mask and face shield only. It is known that during normal breathing, a person releases about 10 watery submicron droplets, which are airborne, also called aerosols. When one exhales, these virus-carrying droplets expand up to 8 feet in length and 4 feet wide, called exhalation plume, that has a large surface and volume that it contaminates. That is the equivalent of a high beam. When one is using a mask, be it the overpraised N95, the plume is drastically shortened to about half a foot or less. That is the first drastic reduction in contamination, the equivalent of a short beam usage. In our terms, it brings a protection factor to collectivity, because it protects that a nearby person to be sprayed with saliva and whatever the breathing person may have inside. The protection factor may be calculated in linear distance as 10 log 1/2 divided by 8 equals 10 log times 1 over 16 equals negative 13 decibels, or in surface or on horizontal or vertical direction, or on any other direction of interest as 10 log times 1/2 times 1/2 divided by 8 times 4 equals 10 log times 1 over 1 to 28, which equals negative 22 decibels, or in volume is 10 log times 1/2 times 1/2 times 1/2 divided by 8 times 4, which equals 10 log times 1 over 512, which equals negative 27 decibels. Well, that's about it. Not quite. As you observed in the lower two pictures, that mask has leakage, and that shortcuts in the mask's protective features, an aspect that we will discuss immediately and is vaguely mentioned in CDC's guidance. All discussed here is how a person protects others in order that others to protect it back, also called collectivity protection. Another important feature is self-protection, and that is all that it matters for many selfish people. How many Americans meet this criterion, I will not tell. Guess it. The basics of the self-protection starts from the mask function as a filter or particle filter, and acts in both directions, when inhaling and when exhaling and protecting others. And for many that is less important, and use a valve to shortcut this process and bypass the mask. On the right is shown the difference between two fundamental types of solid filters: porous membranes that offer surface filtration and felt filters that offer a volume filtration. The face mask uses some volume filtration. For the surface filters, see pictures below. The retention power as function of particle dimension is falling sharp at a certain dimension that is chosen at 0.3 microns but have many low capacity, while the volume filters may filter higher volumes with a smaller pressure drop on filter, but have the retention powers filling with particle magnitude smoothly. For example, an N95 mask retains only 95% of the 0.3 micron particles and about 10% of 0.1 micron particles as COVID-19. This makes the protection factor for 0.3 microns to be 10 log times 5 over 100, which equals negative 13 decibels, while for 0.1 microns it is 10 log of 90 over 100, which equals negative 0.46 micron, almost nothing. For larger particles as 1 micron, it is 10 log of 1 over 100, which equals negative 20 decibels or even larger. Well, this is a simplification and analogy with electromagnetic shielding recently developed against directed energy weapons that are using EM beams. In fact, mask acts on the concentration of agent applied on it, depleting some fractions from it. For example, an N95 is reducing the concentration of 0.3 micron particles from 100 to 5, This technical term used is the depletion enrichment factor that is defined as the ratio between output concentration versus input concentration, as shown in the figure from the slide. In the case of the virus, also called viroli, when not active during transport to the targeted host, the protection occurs only when the depletion of the viroli takes place. Diffusion and expansion of exhaled gas and air also derives to a dilution or viroli depletion. This is assured by distance or wind, and it may act as equivalent for a mask. Of course, dimensional distribution will be different because that is dependent on depletion process. The depletion factor is a power factor, having usually a high exponent. Therefore, using logarithmic scale is simplifying the number and makes this exponential process become linear and additive, with some common sense restrictions, of course. Everybody talks about wearing a mask or whatever, even a bandana or a soak, but few think if the protection offered may be enough. The question is how much protection one needs really. The technical details were briefly presented on the concentration and aggressive agent and exposure time, finally reduced at concentration ratio among how many viroli one may inhale unprotected versus the minimum number one needs to get sick in that amount of time. To become clearer, we took an example. A patient insulated in a 10 millimeter cubed room for 1 day. The room is sealed tight and the patient breathed all that air once, living inside his exhaling composition. At the room atmosphere is clear that the patient is at the very limit of asphyxiation, because one man uses about 10 square meters a day. In this case, the concentration of viroli may be as high as possible for a high contagiousness level. If a physician stays there for 1 minute, it may need less than 1 viroli to get sick. At low concentration, corpuscular effects may come into play, and the probability of getting infected is dominated by Poisson statistics. We consider acceptable the chance that 1 in 1,000 exposures to get sick, and that leads to inhaling 0.001 particles in 1 minute. Therefore, to stay safe about 1 minute inside that enclosure, one needs about negative 110 decibels in protection factor. Considering mask failure modes probabilities, the protection factor have to be a little higher, say with negative 120 at a minimum, for a certain risk level of 0.1%. That is a lot of protection, and remember we talked about 20 decibels as high protection factor delivered by N100, at which one may add the collective protection of negative 20 decibels, but this is missing the case. The probability distribution for the usual masks worn by medical personnel according to the CDC as N95 and eventually N100 showed 1 in 25 chance to get infected wearing an N95 and a 1 in 80 if a N100 is worn. This is proven to the right by a statistic which showed that on April 17, 2020, 819,000 people were infected, from which 9,000 were first responders. The average protection factor was about negative 19 decibels. With all consideration, this protection was simply inappropriate. As we showed, a physician has to dive inside the atmosphere inside a small room. Why not using a diving suit? And there are several options. A diving bell similar to that invented 400 years ago that has a disadvantage that in the absence of a continuous flow, the exhaled CO2 concentrates, making the atmosphere unbreathable. Another version is a complete scuba diving equipment with the disadvantage of being heavy and noisy. A rebreather equipment as Super ARO that releases no exhaled gas is the optimum, but is technologically complex and hazardous in operation for low training people. A complete PPE with autonomous air supply is the right solution for entering that room. Let now understand masks as a complex protection tool. If one does not use the mask just to check a box in a formal safety and has expectations for self-protection, then needs to really understand how masks work and how much protection may get. A typical mask comprises the 4 layers seen in the left side picture. The role of the first layer is to be skin friendly, to not retain particles, and also produce a gap between the skin and the retained particles in the second layer. The second layer is made of highly density filtering material, being a volume filter that accumulates the particles in its volume, mainly by impacting process. The third filter is complementary to the second, using electrostatic forces to produce retention of drier polarized particles that manage to escape the volume filtration. The fourth layer is basically a coating with protective roll. This type of sequence is specific to a unidirectional filter that for the opposite direction has to use a bypass valve as seen in the mask nearby. The direction of use depends on application and may filter the inhaling or exhaling air depending on where the threat is located. The rubber mask below are inhaling filters protecting a person against a contaminated environment or located using movable filtration units that may be for organic cases, dust and particulates, bacteriological matter, or chemical or warfare agents. The surgical masks are mainly bidirectional filters but are designed to be used with a dedicated side inside because it has a skin-friendly material, while on the other it has a hydrophobic material. Both outer materials are used to prevent the filtered agent from being in contact with hands or skin during mask handling. The central fiber is the filter that stops the dangerous agent in its volume. The average protection factor for this kind of mask is -13, while the other masks may reach up to -30 decibels if correctly applied. The movie and measurements made by Florida Atlantic University College of Engineering and Computer Science has the merit of stressing in a more convincing manner what militaries know since World War I. Breathing have to be performed entirely through mask filter with no leakage no matter how hard it is to breathe. The incentive for militaries is clear and immediate: avoid death. The study shows the aerosol problem in its entire complexity. It shows the effectiveness of each type of face protection under the aspect of filtering material, as simple cloth, folded cloth, and cone filter, and compare with face shield and no protection. It is obvious that all the air that a person needs to breathe is passing through the mask. The filter is depleting the hazardous agent, but not completely depending on its retention power. That is a function of materials and constructive dimensions and details, flow rate, temperature, humidity, wear level, and effectiveness on its application. On the movie is also seen that a mask is delivering low personal protection and good enough collectivity protection, deflecting downwards and towards the sides of the exhalation jet. The movie also highlighted bigger droplets atomization and smaller droplets produced in bandana and low mesh, no fabrics. Various types of leakage in the masks is also shown, and the different dimensional distribution and aerodynamic grouping of cod plume is also very clearly visualized. We warmly recommend their research. Well, if the previous images are valid anywhere, a main unknown in this present pandemic time was the behavior of exhaled aerosols in closed enclosures. That appeared very, very strange in the context that CDC and IOSH had detailed studies and publications starting from 50 years ago. In the time of developing air quality protocols as California's Improve aimed to reduce air pollution inside and outside. The basic truth is that anywhere you may stay, inside or outside, wind and air currents are present and produce an active movement of aerosols. It was a scene of horror comic movies to watch how candid CDC complained that the fact that 6 feet separation distance rules does not work inside enclosures as rooms, hallways, amphitheaters. Great job as you acknowledge that. It may not work outside either because it all depends on air currents or wind. Here you are in some examples. In the upper side is a schematic view of a meeting room with HVAC currents, and one may see how heterogeneous are the airflow distribution and speed, mixing air all around. Nearby is shown how a smoke or exhalation propagates on a hallway with no wind. Anybody in the plume range is sprayed. In center is shown air currents under a closed door. The bottom shows what happens when wind comes from a lateral side or from the front with respect to exhalation direction and how it takes control over the plume. This observation is good and bad depending on what one understands from here. It is bad because this is the agent that breaks the 6-foot safety rule, but it is good as wind can be artificially created in the desired direction to enhance safety. In the Florida Atlantic University pictures below, there were presented in detail the mask leakage, but how does this type of frequent failure affect the protection factor? The man in the left exhales through mask, but he makes the common mistake most of U.S. public makes wearing the surgical and homemade masks. In fact, it is not general public fault, but a design error and a usage error. This type of mask were not conceived for this application, but to prevent a healthy surgeon to leave his spit over a patient. Dimming this exhalation jet in order to make a patient feel safe, it was a cult object, part of a ritual. Make the patient feel like it is in a special environment. Simply, these masks were not designed to apply the first rule of military usage of a gas mask: breathe only through mask with no leakage. But it is what it is. People are wearing it, and here you are what happens. As one may see in this picture, when a person exhales without a mask, they put in aerosol particles with a dimensional distribution following the red curve with a maximum of 0.6 microns. Breathing through the mask that supposing is better than N95 stops 99% of particles. One may get the blue curve. When coughing, the particle distribution curve changes as the red curve with square dots show. Dots representing measurement points in a scientific research work, with a maximum at 8, 12, and 20 microns. Being larger particles are easier to be retained by a mask that leaves to pass through a curve in dark blue that is much smaller than the light blue curve. But because the cough is made of fluid droplets, microfluidic processes that take place in some of the bigger droplets are atomized and transformed into a lot of smaller droplets with a distribution shown by the brown dashed curve that adds to the dark blue curve. In order to get the distribution of the staff that pass through the filter, that one has to understand these curves are momentary and differ from person to person and are dependent on all aerodynamic and fluidic conditions that happen inside respiratory tracts. Under the chart there are 2 arrows, a dark blue one that shows the domain of airborne fractions and a violet pink one that gives an indication of the time needed to fall 1 meter driven by Stokes force and if the falling speed is lower than that of the air currents. The particles may stay airborne forever, calming down only when depositing by condensation like a fog on surrounding surfaces. It's important to understand that the minimum time for an object to fall 1 meter is 0.45 seconds. Based on wind resistance, for example, the terminal speed of a skydiver in one belly-to-earth face down. Free fall position is about 195 kilometers per hour. Rocks may fall faster, but from rest to 1 meter below, nothing can fall faster than 0.45 seconds due to gravitational acceleration. Therefore, one observes that almost all droplets up to 100 microns may be airborne. The watery droplets may carry inside various bioagents and viruses and bacteria in number depending on the contagiousness level of the person. In our understanding, LCL, low contagiousness level, or healthy when no virus is found in droplets, HCL, high contagiousness level, is reached when a droplet is carrying a viroli, and UHCL, ultra high contagiousness level, is when many viroli are found in a droplet. Now, based on the same medical measurements, a person breathing exhaling about 10 droplets per cubic millimeter, and a man exhales about 10 liters per minute, giving the number of 100 million droplets. And if you suppose come from an HCL person with about 100 million viroli released in 1 minute, now as the figures show, 60% of the exhaled air flows from mask and only about 1 in 100 droplets pass through, giving 600,000 droplets. A mask that reduces 100 times attenuation and concentration delivers a protection factor of negative 20 decibels. 40% of the exhaled air flow through leakage, leaving the number of droplets unchanged, and there are 40 million droplets released together with 0.6 million TAT were passed through the mask, giving a total of 40.6 million droplets. This is very bad because it reduces the protection factor to negative 1.3 decibels and reduces effectiveness of mask by 15 times. In this condition, the protection delivered by the mask as a filter does not matter, and only the reduction of spit range still matters as a collective protection. Now apply contagiousness level 1, realize the number of viruli present in the air as airborne aerosols, waiting for somebody to inhale or touch them. This is an exemplification of how exhalation through the mask is a decisive factor in infections inside a grocery shop when all the U.S. government protection rules are followed exceptionally well. In the center of an image is given the heart rate of about 75 beats per minute of the gentleman shopping and seeking the desired item. He uses a surgical mask with the properties discussed before, and he has 6 respirations per minute formed by exhalation and inhalation shown in the chart. Nearby on the left is shown how the exhalation plumes may look like using some medical research laser pictures, and they are represented ideographically with red-orange clouds that remain behind diluting in air marked with E number. On the floor is drawn the elapsed time and position in seconds according to the chat. Between exhalation, the man inhales and is doing that at his mouth-nose-eye level marked with I number. It is seen that exhalation plumes are moved by the downward air current shown by light blue arrows. In the nearby left side picture, one may see a woman shopping, leaving behind her exhalation plumes, which cross path in the last 10 seconds with a man shopping and leaving behind in the air current his plumes. Now the inhaling level of a woman is marked by the yellow dotted line and crosses the yellow dash line of man's exhalations, marked with a yellow dash line giving an exposure. Supposing the man was an HCL, releasing 1 liter plume with 4 million viruli, the woman had inhaled about 0.8 liters in that space, got an intake of about 1 million viruli. Do you think she had enough for getting infected by the virus and fall sick too? Now let's take a look at what happens when one inhales. The mask leaks as before, but because of the negative pressure under the mask, it comes toward the face, tightening more and reducing the leaking, in total by 30% that bypasses the mask. As you saw now, the calculation for the woman's viruli dose is used in the figure. The rest of 70% of the airflow inhaled passes through filter and is depleted, say 100 times, given by the light blue curve, while the rest of 30% passes unfiltered and gives the red curve. In this condition, the mask protection factor of 20 decibels is reduced to about negative 1.7 decibels, and the mask's effectiveness drops 12 times. This is like no protection, and is the root of the recorded high daily infection rate. This slide is a little bit too complex for the ordinary people. It refers to measurements the author done in 1980s using calibrated particle magnitude radioactive nanopowders to fast trace the filter material sample response curve as a complex function of airflow rate, temperature, humidity, filter load using the aerodynamic customized test bench presented schematically in upper left side, with research financed by military industrial complex. Hundreds of charts as that shown below were obtained for each material of interest for air and liquid lubricant filters. On the right side are presented briefly some results on real-time measurements on oil lubricant filters for ICE internal combustion engines using RBS and PIX-IBA ion beam analysis, nuclear methods that show where the material is folded trends to accumulate more particles than on the flat parallel surface due to microfluidic effects and flow lines. This effect is used in tangential filtration concentration units. We do not enter in more detail. The reason we added here is to show that filter behavior is more complicated than previously presented, and what was presented is a minimum public needs to know to better protect themselves, and we wonder why this knowledge was not shared by governments, considering populations dumber than they really are. Here is a brief presentation of the measurements at Laboratory of Aerodynamics in the U.S. published by Kristen Aiken, a HuffPost Life reporter on April 21, 2020, 6 a.m. they made on various materials using a simplified but effective setup, shown in the picture in the right, made by U.S. Smart Air CEO's aeronautical engineer Patty Robertson made an ad hoc test bench for various materials people may use for masks to protect themselves. In the central picture is shown how a sub-micron droplet or a 100 nanometer dry alveoli, the white dots, look at scale inside the filtering felt. The bluish is a watery droplet covering a salt microcrystal, solution recommended by us to increase filter's efficiency. Another mass study in mass type ranking. As one can see, subject is hot. People just realize that masks are important and start measuring them. Unfortunately, the capability of ad hoc instruments to accurately characterize the small aerosols under 1 micron is reduced, and numeric differences occur that are also due to materials properties variation. As Corin Miller in his article on Yahoo Lifestyle on Thursday, October 8, 2020, entitled Neck Gaiters Can Protect Against Spreading COVID, study finds, show the debate for various protection systems done by a competition among many institutions as University of Georgia, who took a protocol created by Duke University researchers who used a laser to see which masks were best at preventing respiratory droplets from spreading, and enhanced it to create what seems to be the first actual face mask and neck gaiter study, shown in Figure 20b, in disagreement with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, which doesn't recommend the use of gaiters to protect against the coronavirus. The sad truth is there is no dry mask or filter able to prevent the spread against COVID-19. The role of something over mouth and nose is just to reduce the spray area and volume. That means protect community, and community will protect you. This figure shows how damaging a person opening breathing inside a clean room may be for level of cleanliness in that room, disqualifying the room in minutes. The standards for clean room and aerosol behaviors is a subject well known since 1950s. The figure shows what standard represents in terms of particle magnitude distribution on the left scale in numbers per meter squared. On the same scale, but now in number per centimeter cubed, cubic centimeters 1 million times smaller than a cubic meter, is shown on the exhaust of a patient in hospital or a person in clean room. If the room downwards air current will not take any breathing output, the clean room condition will be immediately compromised in less than 1 minute. Unfortunately, many hospitals and clinics are using air recirculation for economic reasons that transforms them into COVID-19 accumulators. As previously shown, this virus successfully passes through recirculation system and spreads into entire building like in a hospice or hospital. And only autonomous respirators and full body coveralls is a safe way to enter those buildings if one is probably sick inside. Individual protection versus collectivity mutual protection. As we learned before, a mask that leaks is almost as good as no mask, but it still has a valuable role in mutual protection, shortening the range one may expel the droplets, and that made us think if there is not another better way to do this protection. What is needed is a mouth-nose exhalation air jet deflector that may be simply achieved by cutting in half water bottle and fixing it on glasses. Another solution is to use a face shield, and was measured by the Atlantic University in Florida, presented in image number 2, while 3, 4, and 5 represent cheap but effective integral head protection previously presented. Virus propagation through skin. As it was stressed before, the virus is small, and in this figure we took a COVID-19 ideogram and tried to reduce it at scale to match a hair string cross-section, and we can't see its structure anymore because it became a dot when it was about the right scale with the magnified cross-section on the hair. COVID-19 is diffusing through skin, being by 500 times smaller than a hair and 10 times smaller than a skin pore. Once inside the skin, it enables spikes perform a peristaltic movement propulsion, activated by molecular electric potentials and thermal movement, until it enters into the tissue cell blood vein and has a one-stop ride to the lungs, where it settles in the alveoli and starts multiplying, making the alveoli react and generate mucus until it clogs the lung and takes out its usage. The person becomes sick and has increased chances to die. As US basically is producing nothing, there were shortages of PPE and protection masks. The product its highest short supply was active thinking and brain. If they would understand the particularities of the virus, there were simple solutions to cut down the rate of multiplication R by wearing zero-cost protective solutions, being more efficient than bandanas and face masks. And these are just 1/2 water bottle. It produces a mouth-nose jet deflector delivering negative 20 decibels, while an N95 delivers negative 13 decibels. Even a piece of paper towel is more effective because it deflects the entire exhalation flow downwards. An apparent simple solution, easy to build, is this: paper towel all around with transparent tape for eyes. The paper towel may be impregnated in salt, creating an aggressive environment for COVID-19 viruli traveling inside watery droplets. It is made from an absorbent paper towel that usually has holes up to 5 microns and a mild particle retention curve when used as a filter, and it is estimated to be 70% effective in protecting as it is for direct impact because of the virus-contaminated airflow, but seems to be better than a mask than it is estimated at 30% because it does not cover all around the head and neck. To improve the effect, this mask is made of paper towel, have to be immersed in a saturated at 120 Fahrenheit or more saline solution, and when taking out, salt crystallizes on paper fiber, reducing the porosity and forming a chemical barrier able to kill and seal the virus. It is known that to survive, virus comes surrounded on a respiratory apparatus expelled aerosol containing wet spit. The wet spit melts the salt crystal, making a local ionic solution that has free chemically aggressive radicals as Na plus and Cl minus, and more that react with the virus, breaking down and dismantling it. Meanwhile, the excess of water evaporates and the salt recrystallizes, trapping the dead virus into the solid lattice and sealing it there. Even if, due to vibration and airflow, that crystallite is falling into inhaling airflow and reaches the lungs, it is no more functional, and white cells in the blood will further process and trash it via urine. That is how salty chemical shield works. A more effective protection relies on full head covering, preventing COVID pass through the skin too. The near zero-cost grocery bag is a solution, but because of enclosed volume, makes exhalation mix with inhalation air, depleting its oxygen and producing a growth in humidity inside. It requires continuous filtered air supply, and the cheapest is about $10, is to place a fan and filter above, but that increases the cost and introduces fan noise and vibration as a discomfort. The use of real salt shields is increasing the protection factor as it nears negative 50 decibels. A more elaborate and expensive protection worth about $30 in materials is presented in the figure above that uses a plastic face shield and a plastic-coated fabric that may be plated with chemically active collars and sprayed with saline solution. The fan with HEPA MREV16 filters on top of inside a stray haw of much better than a plastic helmet to protect against rain is delivering the forced clean airflow. The suit also delivers negative 50 decibels in protection factor, and because it has a tendency of releasing the exhaled air at chest levels, contributing to collectivity protection factor 2 by a few decibels. Because after acquiring the virus, a person feels no change for several days up to several weeks and becomes contagious. Meanwhile, most probably after a few days sharing the virus with almost all encountered persons, leaving contrail of viruses all along the places he moved through, where the virus survives for at least a few days, increasing the probability of being collected by other persons entering in contact with those places at a later time, making the tracking and installation process very difficult. An operational method that infringes on the privacy assumptions of a cell phone customer work like this. Based on the presidential declaration of emergency cell phone operators are required that mandatory to produce based on all the information necessary to stop pandemic. The medical authority in the state will communicate to cell phone operators in the name and cell phones of a positive tested person. As shown in the figure, the operators will track the last 2 weeks all the coordinates the person of interest reached, marking the trajectory of the person, as shown for a few minutes by the red dashed line. All along this line, it measures the distance to other mobile phones, and correlating the wind direction builds up a plume of COVID-19 or other contaminant, as seen on the map in the red ellipse. Counting the interaction time and distance, one may estimate between the contamination probability, classifying the image in 4 levels of attention. A further improvement, one possible, is to consider the breathing rate of the infected person as plume to be modulated. All the cell phones with which the infected person enters in collision will be identified, and the bearer also identified, with the probability of contamination associated. The persons with probability of contamination over 50% will be closed detention and confined quarantine and testing, while the persons above 50% will be in self-quarantine if acceptable for them, else arrested and sent confined quarantine. This will guarantee that the Tier 1 of agents are immobilized and prevented the spread of COVID. As the figure showed, in a non-crowded street, a virus carrier was able to infect 8 people, from which one half over 50% probability of disease transmission. The investigation go further, identifying the second tier of virus potential carrier, applying the same procedure to first tier identified persons, tracking them on map 2, and on so up to third tier that enters under the spreading time up to date. This way, by mobilizing all spreading potential agents up to date, the virus of one carrier is out of field and multiplication chain stopped and will be over in a few weeks from the date under medical special care. The duration of this process is about 1 week until all known sources have been identified and passivated, driving the number to about several thousand people. Meanwhile, the affected collectivity has to wear the individual protection system for about 3 weeks until there is no new case reported, but doing the same activities as before with local protection in place. The cost of inaction, deception, and misleading is higher than ever before because the development of contamination is a function of power or positive coefficient exponential, as the world charts show, doubling from nation to nation with the rate between 2 days to 1 week for doubling of the cases of positive confirmations. In some cases, lower coefficients are due to saturation and testing capabilities, as is the case of the U.S. Mortality rate is higher in states where political class is dominated by lawyers or people with at maximum a high school and moonlight continued education who have no scientific understanding, and institutions where the decision people are mainly political appointees looking for orders from above and ignoring any opinion coming from specialists or smart people. As an exemplification in the figure above, where the lower left corner of the yellow surface is shown in the COVID-19 average evolution vector, where the infection takes place, incubating for a few days, then becoming contagious, spreading in a seamless mode, having a stealth propagation in society, because the infected person feels good symptoms in a seamless mode until a week after, when these appear and the infected person realizes that they are sick and seek medical assistance. Meanwhile, infected person realizes it and has not contacted a lot of people, unknowingly entering inside his virus-spreading plume, most of them strangers. Statistically, from these 50 to 100 people exposed by a few will catch the virus and start a new cycle, as in a fractal development of a tree with a variable number of branches developing from the red segment. The virus evolution diagram shows the infection developing inside a body with orange arrow and the contagiousness stage with a red segment, followed by test and hospitalization ending in blue arrow, with 2 ending points that are recovered or dead. In the figure above is the given timeline for 3 months, with an extension of 16 weeks for graphical consistency purposes. The main vector of disease propagation, for the sake of the ideogram, is placed in the center of the image, where it's supposed that one sick person at the end of stage transmits it to another person, a kind of criticality factor KEF equals 1. Multiplication factor R by an order of magnitude higher than nuclear blast criticality factor K. One may see in center of the 2 images a Smith's employee, E1, labeled with a yellow, not wearing mask, breathing heavily, as pushing some heavy stuff. If he was infected and is contagious, he feels no symptoms, feels good, but his exhalation droplets are filled with COVID-19. As he's breathing hard, he's releasing about 9 meters per air in 3 breaths, 20 seconds apart. The volume of gas release is a little bit bigger than a Coca-Cola mixed plastic bottle. Because he is not coughing or sneezing, the spit droplets particle magnitude PM distribution has multiple peaks, one under 1 m, which floats in the air for more than 1 hour, and a few over 1 m that remains in air about 10 minutes. Both have Stokes speeds smaller than the critical airflow, and almost all particles exhaled are airborne, following the air currents in that area, as one can see in figure 6. A little amount under 10% have PM over 10 meters and are dropping on the floor and stuff like shelves, like fog at due condensation point, wetting the surfaces labeled with red star, grenade-like, marked C4, C5, C6, where each contaminated spot may infect several customers buying the product that knows that COVID-19 may survive on plastic surfaces up to 3 days, waiting quietly for customer C to come, buy the product, touch, and get infected by the known means, so much debated by old-school U.S. physicians and epidemiologists. Moreover, their knowledge is this coronavirus was engineered by nanobot 7. It also propagates directly through the skin, being 500 times smaller than the diameter of a hair, 100 times smaller than the diameter of a skin pore. In the 3D chart, the z-axis is a multidimensional axis representing the disease vector from the moment the patient is infected up to the moment the disease was finalized, having one of the 2 main possible exits, dead or alive. The chart is inaccurate because it is depicting direct contamination mechanism only, but is missing the indirect contamination with an initial period, from the moment of contamination of collateral objects, where the virus is waiting on surfaces and dying in time under element aggression, as in the case of customers C4 to C6, who got infected minutes up to days after initial contamination. On abscissa C is represented in a logarithmic scale the number of virus units ingested by a customer as C1 to C3 and as a function of the ingested number of virus particulates. On the y-axis, it is represented the delay in days until a sickness level to be accomplished. Unfortunately, there are no medical standards that uniquely identify a sickness level, in relative with respect to patient's performance, or absolute units in relation to statistical species performance, similar with humidity measurement in relative units percent, no matter the temperature or absolute G. In relative units percent, there are a very, very few classifications of the sensitivity of a virus in 4 classes, as the red curves being the sensitivities of immunodeficiency people, labeled with yellow edge red stars, and weakened immune systems as an elderly population. The next in sensitivity curve is the direct lung ingestion by breathing directly air infected with virus-carrying droplets. The analysis is also missing an important parameter, the amount of viruses inside the exhalation droplets as a function of contagiousness level of the infestation source. In our example, the employee E1, 100% contamination was forced in the absence of any measurement data of COVID-19. Next in sensitivity is a skin intake via face, nose, or eyes via hand, leg, and skin, contaminated by contact with surfaces of loaded airflow. It's a common sense to suppose that a large amount of virus in one may need to get infected by skin, because most of the virus may be killed by sweat's acidity or salinity while passing through skin pores into blood veins, and from there via heart into lungs, then by directly bringing the virus into a lung alveoli. The probability curve shows that the possibility that the customer is infected in a single day. One may need time that the virus to build up a little until the infection level to be complete and the contagious stage start. Daily tests of all employees at entry-exit shift for temperature, pulse rate, and oxygen recorded and processed on computer. Employee biocycle curve will result, and any abatement will be signed advanced detection of potential illness or medication, and employee will be deferred from further screening and or quarantine. In order to clearly understand this computerized process, one had to take these measurements on a routine basis, good enough as to determine biocycles, period, and amplitudes, as in our case of 23, 28, 33 days, and in 2% of amplitude modification, but these values are variable case by case. When some incident occurs, such as a virus, bacteria exposure, and the employee reacted or not, it may appear as a fracture in the dataset determined by a computer within 1 to 2 days delay from the incident by detecting the parameter sudden change in shift because of virus function that overrides the body function. And if employee applied medication and conceals the fact that is visible and triggers the recommendation for medical attention and COVID-19 test, our experience showed that pulse rate is by 1/2 day in advance of temperature as bodies reacting to virus attack while oxygen levels react if lung bacteria attack is triggered also. When medication is applied in order to tamper temperature increase, the parameters are falling together, except for blood pressures that are increasing. This method has the advantage of early detection, sometimes during incubation stages in the first few days after being infected. The figure shows early effects of wearing masks in various nations and the cost of behavior induced. China was first hit, followed by Italy, then the U.S. China stopped pandemic, while in Italy and U.S., who downplayed the virus, casualties kept growing, and so the number of deaths. Arrogance and misinformation turned at a very high cost. This action was criminal and was performed with clear knowledge that pandemic's casualties were mainly poor, uneducated, or people with medical pre-existing conditions, making an ethnic cleansing, and eliminating vulnerable people from Social Security and Medicare, saving money from their states by cost avoidance. Is a brief representation and pled for people to wear a mask as minimum level of protection required to reduce the virus transmission rate, and by this way to avoid becoming sick or sickening others and reduce the need for a ventilator and coffins, and of course burning space. Unfortunately, this became a political issue in the U.S. and undesirable happened, America being first at COVID-19 casualties. The 50 years of highly praised bragadication in the U.S. drove to a population unwilling to listen, get the facts, and understand the consequences. They became used to follow the rules, follow the chain of command, no matter how unhinged their leaders are. Finally, they became unable to use their brains, have some initiative, declare or not, became conservative, unable to adapt, and the main reason is their difficulty to learn and understand. The vaccine was an overpromised promise. As being the only way to end the pandemic, they enter into disarray with reality. U.S. government, their rap speed is something 10 times slower than normal speed. Therefore, they promised to apply 20 million vaccines, and in reality, they did 10% of that. This is the raw data from Web Worldometer, COVID extracted from 2 leading economies, USA and China in the world. The table giving relative results towards the bottom of Figure 1 shows how much U.S. and China represents from world cases, which is the ratio between U.S. and China. The relative results show the weight of the U.S. and China data in the world, and the last line presents how many times U.S. overpassed China in casualties and deaths. It is seen that the chances of dying COVID in the U.S. are about 285 times higher than in China. Appalling. No comments. It is hard now to put on the same chart the total cases of coronavirus in the U.S., red, blue, and China, light blue, because orders of magnitude difference, when the most unexpected was for U.S. to follow a learning curve as drawn by the dashed light blue curve, making U.S. have a fraction of China. On the lower chart of daily cases, it is seen that China was a small wave with a spike and ended quickly, while in the U.S. looks like a tsunami wave incoming. There was a proposed solution that indeed was technological and uncomfortable to wear compared to that cloth in the snout, but there is no free lunch, except for mice on the mouse pad. The reality showed that investing $200 per capita level, $70 billion, might have been a real economic stimulus, keeping the people safe in close proximity and economy going normally, with no shutdown and no loss. Even now, if the solution proposed is applied, terminates pandemic in less than 6 weeks. This is what we are proposing versus what we have been done. It is a revolutionary product and investment to the future, but requires high education and discipline in wearing it efficiently. The deaths is the most meaningful part for the Americans who politicize the mask wearing as minimal protection, and even for the president who lost elections because most of his potential voters were killed, in spite sometimes dead voters vote. Now COVID infectious map and red and political map, with some exceptions, have a standing resemblance, and sick people have difficulties attending to vote. The message from the charts is that in spite vaccines have been approved and delivered, it may take 150 weeks to vaccinate the entire population. Meanwhile, the deaths and infection will grow, and 1/2 the population may be immunized by recovering from disease, and only the leftovers will be immunized by vaccine. The toll in life loss and time in hospitals lost by U.S. people is huge, and this marks the loss by the USA of the world's leadership position by 2021 instead of by 2028 as predicted. The predictions are grim. The extrapolations consider the vaccination effect in flattening the growth curves. The solution proposed is stop virus and eliminating the urgency in vaccination, but require a smart society. In order to understand what happened, we have to have a closer look at the hierarchy of controls applied for this pandemic briefly in Figure 1, upper right side, and how their application affected the results. Looking at Table 1 and Figure 1, it seems that the knowledge and advance warning were greatly ignored in the USA, and first, common sense protection measures and the possibility hierarchy of controls have been forgotten or deliberately minimized when compared with China or other successful countries that succeeded to keep SARS-CoV-2 under control. In Figure 2 on the right side is presented a 1960s lunar module with over 100 controls that successfully landed on the moon starting from 1969, showing that if a man knows what he's doing, he may easily successfully more than 100 controls, and as was the case with Apollo missions and many process control rooms whose successful operation passes unnoticed by the media. Under the eagle picture, there is drawn the hierarchy of controls that are used for protection based on the NIOSH that are well known as hierarchy of controls, a foundational concept for solving OSH challenges that consists of 5 ways to mitigate or eliminate a hazard that are ranked in order of effectiveness and therefore preference that seems to be fully admitted by the CDC. These controls are presented briefly in the lower left corner of Figure 2, and they are elimination, dark blue, that involves physically removing a hazard. It can eradicate viruses by denying access to host cells so that the virus is unable to replicate. Most people think that denying access comes in the form of effective vaccinations and transmission prevention. Substitution green is the act of replacing a graven hazard with something less hazardous by administering a drug that interferes with the virus's abilities to replicate once inside a person's infected body, in effect making a more lethal virus into a less lethal one. Engineering controls orange involves isolating people from a hazard, replacing a barrier between them as a sneeze screen, appropriate ventilation that take time to appropriately produce and deploy. Administrative controls brown red, which involve changing the way people work or act, include changes in policy or procedures to reduce or minimize hazard exposure, personal hygiene, isolation of people, limiting the size and gatherings, and keeping a 6-foot separation between people are difficult to implement because some human beings are rarely perfect at compliance, but is a temporary solution, bridging the gap until more efficient controls can be put in place. PPE, personal protective equipment, red, such gloves, masks, and protective equipment that use a protective barrier between the worker and the hazard is the least effective control, and training on the proper use and limitations is needed. Despite the fact that PPE is at the bottom of the hierarchy, it has been a major focus during the COVID-19 pandemic because similar to the administrative controls, PPE can be implemented quickly if it's available, but in the US it was not. This basic knowledge was also greatly ignored in the US, but was well considered in China, Taiwan, and others. Breathing seems to be the first big secret for the U.S. Americans are breathing. All of them, when alive, and when they inhale, they take inside what they have in front of their mouth, and when they exhale, they bring out everything they have inside and share with all the love. If there is COVID viruli, COVID will be on the menu. Early on, China understood and used this piece of knowledge in about 90%, while U.S. greatly ignored it, setting at about 10% despite CDC, NIOSH, and had all this knowledge since the 1970s. But it is now known that they were muffled by the administration for political reasons. In order to develop an efficient protection, one has to give up a very high importance to this fact and accommodate the protection systems accordingly. The ideal value for this parameter is about 98%, a little above China's value. Aerosols seem to be the second big secret for the U.S. A normal exhalation produces about 10,000 particles per cc, with dimension under 50 microns down to 0.1 microns, COVID's viral dimensions, that are airborne and stay to go with air currents like cigar smoke, ladies' perfume, and other gases, while living in air or like fog on condensation surfaces and is waiting there to get transmitted for days to weeks. Viroli dies only if it is chemically aggressed in biosterilization environments or if it is interacted with UV light or more energetic photons. U.S. paid no attention to aerosols, 3%, while China learned at its early stages about them and warned the WHO and the world about their main role in transmission, 70%, but many leaders chose to ignore this fact, having a terrible evolution. The ideal value for this is about 95% or higher. Air currents represent another big secret for the U.S. because open air currents and wind direction matters, which due to increased dilution gives 1 in 1,000 chances for a transmission, and this probability becomes higher in crowded spaces. An ideal protection have it highly considered using this fact 90%, while China discovered it about 1 month into pandemic and used it 50%, and U.S. simply ignored it, setting its value at about 3%. The picture in this shows in the pink dashed line a plume of less than 1 meter particles just exhaled by the patient that is believed to be contagious. Due to the heat of the body and the body is near the patient, a thermal is forming, making the plume move towards the 2 medical personnel, which in the moment are inhaling a bunch of viruses carried by small water droplets from the previous exhale, based on measurements in that 10 cubic feet area that are about 2 liters of exhaled gases containing over 10,000 droplets per cubic centimeter, which 1 to 10% depending on how contagious the patient is carrying COVID-19. The picture above shows an airplane examination team that is not properly equipped to enter the atmosphere in the airplane, already homogenized in virus concentration due to closed air circuit. It is true that the system is pressurized with the compressed air coming from the turbine's first stages and in part is leaked from the air structure. that depends from plane to plane. The healthier at this point of view, the older the planes with higher leakage. The two airplane inspectors are prone to get the virus if approaching a sick person, and after they become contagious in a few days to transmit it to passengers they are measuring in the next flight they measure for checkup. To keep the medical staff safe, the descendant wind is required in the first case, with a condition that is fresh air introduced from the base while the air is purged into the atmosphere at the room ceiling, flushing out the viruses. Inside the airplane, things are more complicated, and the full-body PPE with autonomous respirator is needed for safety or a specific procedure that the airplane to flush out all the air inside several times to be sure that cabin is now safe to breathe. On the right side, it is shown that full-body PPE with N95 masks is not appropriate for healthcare providers, inspection teams, because they are placed directly in the plume or a potentially contagious person. The yellow full-body PPE is the right answer for these operations in chronic contaminated environments. An office with invisible made visible. One person, 10 hours exhaled 1,000 gallons of air diluted into the office volume. Usual dilution ratio is 1 out of 10 to 1 out of 30, depends on office dimensions. This is recirculated in AC air systems. Figure 5 shows what happens when a person is sitting inside a room or office for a long time, where the exhaled air accumulates, moving inside the room with the air currents. If a male sits in a room for 24 hours, he exhales 10 cubic meters of air. If the room is large at about 20 by 20 by 10 or 4,000 cubic feet, the final concentration of exhaled particles will be about 10% from original concentration in the exhalation. In U.S., a standard office is about 150 square feet by 8 feet high, or 1,200 cubic feet, and 10% becomes a concentration after only 8 hours of work in a closed space. In that office, the oxygen concentration decreased from 20.8% down to 20.2%. CO2 varied from 800 ppm to 0.5%, and to remain constant, relative humidity increased by a few percent. If the person is contagious in air, virus will be embedded in watery air-sized droplets, and inhaling 10% for 1 minute seems enough to be getting infected. Open spaces lured young people with partial understanding of how virus is transmitted, and here's an example. If a young person checking his phone by chance, he might be infected and asymptomatic by a combination between each breeze, and his exhalations will drive his viral ally in about half the concentration he exhaled to be inhaled by the young woman nearby. Supposing she inhales about 1 liter of air and 50% from the contaminated plume, she may get inside up to 20 million droplets containing the virus. That is good enough for her to get infected from a single sip. But another young man in the back may also think that with masks they are protected, which in fact they are not. Proximity and breeze may put them in jeopardy. This figure now shows how in a hallway or walking path, virus may be transmitted based on properties of the exhaled air. A child is exhaling about 4.6 liters per minute walking, and in aerosol droplets that means 40 to 60 millions per meter. The total volume and plume in the figure is about 1 liter, and that dilutes by a factor of 10 to 20 when the second child enters and inhales into it, taking an average of 50,000 droplets without mask case. In case both kids are wearing an N95 mask, the second kid will inhale something between 100 and 500 droplets in those 10 seconds. It walks 2 meters, and that is enough to get infected. Schools reopening with little knowledge of physical barriers and ignoring common sense facts. Viruses are transmitted and affect the health of kids too, leaving them with long-lasting damages in the body. Despite mortality rate is lower to kids, they are better carriers than adults, and they share with entire family faster. There are no real safety measures in place, and those based on CDC are more formal than of practical use. Children are breathing, and when they exhale, they take out what they have inside in forms of sub-micron air-sized watery droplets. In the figure, one can see a blue t-shirt girl exhaling 2 quarts of air containing about 10,000 droplets per cubic centimeter. During the first 10 seconds, the exhalation plume is in the vicinity of her mouth. Immediately after she inhales and exhales again. Meanwhile, the yellow exhalation plume is diffusing, reducing the droplet concentration to about 3,000 droplets per cc and having a 1.5 gallon volume. The plume moves up, being warmer at 100 Fahrenheit than the surrounding air, which is about 75 Fahrenheit, having some buoyancy. After 30 seconds, it becomes a red plume with concentration of about 1 K per cc and about 4 gallons of volume, passing over the plexiglass spit barrier. But at this moment, it is about room temperature, and further diffusing and comes down, covering the head of the girl nearby in white t-shirt with a concentration of 500 droplets per cc, from which she inhales about 2 quarts and gets 5% of the exhalation of the blue girl. If she is contagious, that is more than enough for the white girl to get infected too. The white t-shirt girl exhalation plumes are trained by class currents and reach another classmate, together with the plumes from the blue t-shirt girl that dilutes 250 droplets per cc and lower to 100 droplets per cc, moving in class. At a college, that gets a 1% of exhalation of the first girl, and because this is a repetitive process that takes about 45 minutes, there's enough time to infect more classmates, which is enough airborne germs. All these systems are conceived around the main idea that we have to deal with what an infected mouth puts out in order to prevent any of the harmful agents to enter another mouth, be inhaled or diffused through the skin, and infect the person. I presented before what the system can do with respect to stopping the pandemic in less than 6 weeks. The system contains 3 active protection devices and a post-infection potential treatment of the lungs by using advanced washing solutions. The first system is an autonomous system able to provide life support in very harsh conditions, having the advantage of being modular and customizable on the thread, but has a disadvantage of being complex and difficult to wear in its complex structure. The synergistic holistic structure assigns the protection on 4 independent branches working together and to assure the individual the maximum protection and reasonably achievable. In other words, the optimal protection. It relies on the collectivity protection obtained by a combination of administrative measures and engineering, personal protection mainly based on filters, enhanced enclosure protection based on design chances with impact on air currents and sterilization procedures, and plume-only drainage system. That is only due to the minimal instrumentation needed to eliminate the threat. All the systems above do not allow eating or shouting because they require to have the mask up. The new design uses a combination of thermoaerodynamics and UV to keep the people safe while eating in a reasonably close proximity. The enhanced lung lavage system applies when people get failed and got sick as a fast and complex manner to recover and refurbish the lungs. It was clear from the very beginning that most exposed surfaces to contaminated air plume is the exposed face to neck surfaces, as well as hand and open view legs, as a soft, comfortable confinement barrier that has to be added, that to be easier than to wear full body PPE. Tests revealed that an upside down airflow is required to have the face shield to maintain it comfortable, and that may be achieved using a combined filter unit that has a salty cover on the inside of the rain cover, making air rotate inside and pass through a cyclone filter with high PM particle retention that deals with rain and dust. Further, it passes through a pretty filter that stops mainly all particles with PM larger than 1 micron and enters into a biosterilization filter made of various antiseptic layers of fabric impregnated in salts as NaCl, KCl, KBr, NaI that uses an advantage of viruli to be transported in watery droplets touching the salt micron grains, melts them, and uses a producing ionic solution that most often destroys the viruli spikes even if DNA phase inside, incapacitating it. More when water evaporates, salt recrystallizes, trapping the virus inside a micrograin easy to be retained by the next HEPA filter. Other chemical compositions as iodopinavine, iodine tinctura, or procatalysis NIPD, PT, etc., and UCC may be used inside. A HEPA filter, MERV, greater than 14, is used to further purify the air and may also desiccate it. In a hot climate, a light heat exchanger may also be added with the US ultrasound nebulizer in order to provide it with the improved quality of respiration. A fan is also required to make a continuous flow, and electronics box may be added with data acquisition system for bioparameters as temperature, oxygen level, and pulse rate of the bear, as well as environmental parameters as pressure, temperature, humidity, noise level, etc. Speaking from inside is impaired by direct attenuation and reflection in the face shield, as an audio system with microphone inside and loudspeakers outside may be added, of course powered from the same battery as UVC light and fan. A problem after going into a contaminated area and is safely undressing and storing the PPE. For hazmat, there are some portable shower solutions, but for large-scale biohazmat, it turns out to be impractical, and a UV light on the selfie stick may be efficient enough to produce a UV shower, if the person is able to protect their own eyes by closing them or applying a UV absorber soaked in antiseptic solution over. For COVID covering surfaces of contact is enough to be used by fabric, because it will not pass through if not pushed by air pressure difference. The used cloth may be further disinfected as an ozone atmosphere or disinfectant aerosolized solution, or simply use a washing machine. In practical cases in the U.S. with 10% of population infected, the protective suit may be worn and uselessly disinfected almost 20 times until an exposure to occur. A kind of Russian roulette that tests seriously our patience and capability of performing coherently a task even when we learned that in a few cases was useless. As complex as this seems, the system exhibits a PF lower than negative 60 decibels, as for most configurations it is not enough for a real protection inside a COVID-19 viruli exposure. Statistics show that using an actual PPE professional equipment in that atmosphere delivers a risk factor between 4 and 1%, explained by the fact that many failures happen dimming its protection factor as well as undressing contaminated equipment is the most dangerous phase. This is why a UVC shower lamp was introduced in order to sterilize the surfaces of the gaunt before undressing as seen in Zone A. A loaded air zone may be considered in a hospital, in a mine with explosive organic compounds, or in places where a biochemical terrorism attack happened and intervention inside that zone is required. In this case, the electronics will be upgraded with multi-gas analyzer LEL-LTL detection and IR spectral sensors for targeted gas plumes. In this case, the helmet will not deliver directly respiratory gas inside the face shield, but via a hose to a backpack containing all the air processing units in a modular structure used as needed, as Area D shows. The air from helmet, see red arrow shown, to air is refurbishing as entering a counter-current heat exchanger that warms the air up to 200 degrees Celsius directly by a heat exchanger from the nearby heat exchanger that's already hot air exiting, or by electrical assistance, embedded inside a catalytic felt that stabilizes the temperature. A UVC sterilization light may be added in the input to further ionize an organic material, helping to catalyst burn completely. In the final stages of the catalyst, some oxygen on air may be introduced to assure a complete burnout of CO free. After being processed, the air is cooled down as much as possible in the heat exchanger, and it is added to a CO2 sequestration unit that mainly is an alkaline filter. This feature is important in a hydrocarbon and organic chemicals atmosphere. Further, in high oxygen depletion, an oxygen filter may be added, delivering up to a few liters of 90% O2 to enrich the respiratory air, and cooling down at the right temperature and humidification may make the gas better for breathing. The system may also be used in a rebreather regime, using a medical-grade oxygen bottle. It may also be used to deliver additional gases and aromatic elements for bronchodilation, etc. Using a mouthpiece that returns the air refurbishes it, similar to an existing scuba diving rebreather equipment. The problem is that it becomes heavier and more complex than a simple PPE with autonomous compressed air bottle, and instead of being portable 20 kg unit, it may become a transportable unit to load gas bottles to be used. That seems to be lighter and simpler to use. For these last systems, the PF is higher than negative 120 decibel, but undressing remains an issue, and in this process is prone to contamination. The novel system developed to mitigate in part failures to correctly wear all the time the protective equipment, and it is designed in quasi-fail safe, meaning that the protection is dim but remains negative during failure and takes a coincidence among independent factors to obtain a total or major failure, being mainly independent of a single user or participant in the process. The system as seen as Figure 4 provides 4-tier protection as shown in A zone, red triangle, that refers to the specific enclosure system that delivers protection by recirculating downwards the air and sterilizing it. B zone, blue triangle, that refers to a so-called collective protection offered by the other participants by wearing a mask and sterilizing and placing low near the ground exhaled gas. C zone, gray borders, light green filled triangle, where the protective equipment has its own filtration and air purification sterilization system. D zone, gray line, yellow filled triangle, where supplementary vacuum drain tube is installed to capture the exhalation of stationary particles as students in a class, travelers in a bus or plane, etc. In center in a red polygon is presented the problem it addresses, the aerosolized transmission of SARS-CoV-2 inside watery microdroplets from an infected person with red lungs who exhales the air with all he has inside to a healthy person with blue lungs that inhales the air and gets infected, and that air is what we have to deal with. The figure uses the right side to qualitatively present the protection factor in decibels and the risk factor in percentage, ppm and ppb, in order to highlight the theoretical safety delivered by each combination of elements. This is in fact the essence of the development and synergy, where this equipment may be used together in various combinations that are figured out by the overlapping of the zones, creating boundary zones, where any solution S belongs to combinations of A and D, each rated to provide a protection factor of around 50 decibels if all elements inside are considered, taken by 2, generating the series AB, AC, AD, BC, BD, and CD, giving protection factors around negative 100 decibels, and of generating 3 solutions for protection as ABC, ABD, BCD, and CDA, enhancing the protection factor at about 150 decibel range, and altogether generating solution ABCD with a protection factor of about negative 200 decibels. It is observed that the future of safe classes and meetings in persons relies on an ABCD solution that fills in a safe and ACBD solution when somebody moves around or inside-outside that changes the limits from a very safe to safe. Gym rooms also match ABCD case. On the right side of the image, there is a scale with a level protection in decibels, color code on the left side, and risk factor expressed in percent or ppm ppb, with qualitative classification of the safety level, according to the 4 stages of 50 decibels each. It may become obvious that the actual protection factors, according to CDC recommendations, are under 50 decibels, with a risk factor and percentage aggravated by public noncompliance that are a direct cause for the actual tsunami-like pandemic propagation. The analysis also shows which are the major improvements for buildings, transport system, and amphitheaters one may need to stay safe. A basic idea applied in closed environment is to bring fresh, safe-to-breathe air in the mouth to nose height range, and that may be easily, theoretically, or in China, performed in closed environment by forcing airflow as a down current or up current by modifying HVAC systems. 7 years of cleanroom experience show that the best and easiest way is to use down currents for many physical and practical reasons. The most common is to place fresh air up and remove the used air near the floor. The motto is stand tall, inhale fresh air from above, and exhale it down. The easiest way to achieve is to extend HVAC return ducts down near the floor and use a mask with a hose that drives the exhaled air and releases it at a foot level on the floor. Will be good to use a filter on the mask and a sterilization canister on the exhalation hose, and of course to add a UVC sterilization unit in the HVAC, and may be an antibacterial filter too, in addition to a pre-filter and HEPA filter already used. The HVAC unit with these changes will provide a minimum of negative 30 decibel protection, and the filters will add another negative 40 decibels in personal protection, while the sterilization exhale hose will add another negative 30 decibels in collectivity protection, making the persons inside take advantage of at least negative 100 decibels in mutual protection, with a sickness level of around 10%, as the U.S. will reach by February 2021. The probability of transmission in such an environment will be 1 to 20 years for a nominal lead at the space at maximum capacity. These are the main units according to patent application US 17/018117, formed by 6 modules that may be applied independently and protection factors adding which unit used. It is recommended that the unit usage to be carefully customized to the level of threat or probable exposure such as to deliver optimal protection. The concept is to assure a safety margin in case of momentary failures of the units due to human factor. Even if one removes mask, it may stay safe for a while until a system reaction is performed by a corrective action. This is how we learn in public spaces during pandemic alarm. I said alarm because the system have to be worn in a limited time, maximum 6 weeks until pandemic is completely terminated, then sterilized and stored and wait for the next pandemic. In this configuration, one may stay near a contagious person and be safe. The safety issue is skin transmission, because if a book were previously used by a COVID-19 contagious person and not sterilized, in fact it's near impossible to completely sterilize without damaging the books, the virus may survive up to 1 week in the book papers and pass through the hands that deliver negative 30 decibel protection, but 1 in 30 will succeed to pass that barrier and will be inside the venous blood system. Gloves might be required too. This is how we walk the hallways and outside. Placing the exhalation down at feet level and cooled in the ambient temperature, we prevent it from rising up due to thermal buoyancy, and it will stay low for a while, being only driven by air currents. Of course, it will diffuse, expand, and dilute, but as we learned before, dilution adds to protection factor. This is how we travel by transportation mean, bus, car, during carpooling in a high-occupancy vehicle, plane, ship, helicopter, etc. A clean air nozzle will blow clean air from above, and the exhalation will be sent in a vacuum drain tube after being locally sterilized more or less inside exhaust canister. There are cases where the users are steady in various locations, and for those circumstances, it becomes a bonus to collect the exhaled air in a vacuum drain tube simply by plugging in a hose adapter, the exhaust expelled air tube shown in the D area. The system is simple and efficient. It is a kind of shop vacuum having port where the exhaled gas is connected. The advantage is that compared to building a modified HVAC system as described in A area, the system is insensitive to window and or door openings and deals with a much smaller air volume than for the entire enclosure, drastically reducing the contamination risk of the enclosure. For example, a man in 1 hour releases half a cubic meter of contaminated air, and if in a plane, bus, or train, 40 people release about 20 cubic meters of air to be treated. That reduces the risk factor in consumption in case of a recirculation system. In fact, after a supplementary sterilization, the air may be flushed into an environment via air-to-air heat exchanger as to pressure the energy, because the producing a saving of 20 cubic meters times 1 kilojoule per cubic meter times 20 degrees Celsius equals 400 kilojoules per hour, which equals 1/9 of a kilowatt hour, about 1 cent per hour, giving a return of investment of about 4 to 10 years. In other words, dumping the exhaled air for a full bus or amphitheater environment may be done without a big loss directly without air-to-air heat exchanger, but that device is useful for the pressure balance inside the closed enclosure, and the protection factor induced by such a system is better than negative 50 decibels. Failures may occur when the user disconnects and moves inside the enclosure, putting the exhalation near the floor. In classrooms on computer during pandemic alarms, we have to wear the same assembly. That will keep us safe while being together. As one Dr. Fauci misleading statement said, if you are healthy, you do not need to wear a mask, but he ignored to say deliberately that during a COVID-19 infection, an asymptomatic contagious person has no way to know if it is infected and if it does not take a test just because it can with no reason behind. That is why all community have to wear the system until contact tracers followed by testing or disease symptoms occur, and if person is identified and insulated, everybody to be supposed as being infected and behave like one. This is how a classroom looks like during pandemic alarm. No matter what pandemic, how contagious, this method will stop them all, because it addresses the aerosolized and skin contact propagation, and from this point of view, all bioagents behave the same. The numbers are from US Patent 17/018177. We recommend to look into for more details. The vacuumed exhaust system is portable, deployable in case of need, while the HVAC enhancements are permanent and is good to be so, keeping spaces clean and healthy. Traveling with plane, buses, sitting in an amphitheater, all things are the same. A person wearing a system is connected to a vacuum drain tube while it is stationary. When moving, some smart drain tube will detect the presence of the exhalation exhaust tube nearby and open a lateral suction vent in the drain tube and absorb the potentially released gases, or leave this task to the enclosure HVAC system. This is an important stuff to understand because it is about how the system may be breached and protection factor dimmed or canceled by erratic behavior and bad luck. Figure 10 shows a school bus driver watching kids on the street through his bus windshield 1002. Front school bus windshield middle ridge 1000 separates front windshield on the left and is a school bus driver 1001 wearing eyeglasses 1003 and having an airflow in the driver's space 1004 coming from clean inside. He wears a transparent face mask 1005 that allows him to exhale into a tube connector at mask one-way valve 1006 followed by an exhaling tube 1007 which connects to the mask to the exhaled air sterilization modulus 1008 that cleans his exhalation air and sends it to a sterilized exhaled air connection tube 1009 with the connector placed on the bus dashboard 1010 where it has a sterilized exhaled air connector to drain tube 1011 with an RFID label 1012 read by a nearby RFID reader 1017 communicating via Wi-Fi signal 1013 with a computer system and letting the bus driver know when it is not connected to his airflow and drain tube 1015 in order to automatically open the shutter and maintain airflow direction 1016 through drain tube connector and lid 1018. He was watching the kids on the street because despite they were equipped with a complete system as required to travel with the bus, they committed various system protection breaches and endangering each other. A sterilized exhaust plume is released correctly on the street level by middle girl 1019. Left side girl 1020 took off her mask and has inhaling tube 1026 not connected to mask nor her exhaling tube and releases directly in air plume of exhaled gas 1028 which may be potentially contaminated. The student on the right has airflow inhaling intake direction 1021 right towards inhaling modulus 1022. From there does the connecting tube 1023 via inhaling air filtration unit 1024 into face mask 1027, but disconnected her exhaling tube and released her exhale plume 1033 of exhaled air at mouth level through her mask straight in the face of the middle student. The middle student is wearing her transparent mask 1025 correctly, having the tube connecting transparent mask to sterilization modulus 1029. Exhaled air is cleaned in her sterilization of exhaled air modulus 1030 and sent via tube exiting the sterilized exhaled air at street level 1031, producing a plume of sterilized exhaled air released at street level 1032. Even if the student on the right was contagious, the middle student survived the aggression, remaining uncontaminated, because her breathing level is up above the plume and her inhalation filter is working, but the left side student coming from behind may have inhaled air inside that plume taking about 30% of the right student exhalation and she gets infected. There is a risk on middle student to have exhalation droplets from the plume condensate on her face and she is not wearing a face shield. The risk figures for the students are about negative 12 decibels for the middle student in spite of her protection of over negative 30 decibels due to face exposure to warm aerosolized plume that shortcut the protection at about 3 decibels for the right student. The left student is equipped well with pants and is protected against the clean exhaled air from the middle student, having a negative 30 decibel protection at leg skin diffusion level, but remains fully exposed at respiratory level by not wearing the protective system and walking straight into the concho of the right student. In reality, it appears what is called function of luck, because in many cases the breaching of protections nothing bad happens, but this appearance of luck is in fact a probability as a contagious person to be involved, that is given by the ratio between estimated contagious people at large at the effective population involved in contacts in that area. This multi-parameter function is complex and mainly unknown, but that acts as a supplementary protection factor with values in the domain between negative 10 to 30 decibels. This is what we rely on when we say that temporary breaching of some protection stages, it is still safe to operate, and that problem is to not breach them at all to remain in the luck realm. This is about another U.S. patent application, U.S. 16/876337, intended to solve eating, drinking in restaurants and bars, was nominated by the highest pandemic risk places, together with conference rooms, church amphitheaters, and stadiums where people prefer to not wear a mask or the entire protective gear. In order to make pleasant wind downwards over a sitting person's head, one has to cool the air at right temperature and add appropriate humidity inside the comfort level, bringing the air at a little bit higher temperature and adding water droplets as fog produced an ultrasonic nebulizer. It will produce air cooling by droplets evaporation, amplifying the down current and producing a vortex similar to Virga 2 effect produced in nature during rains over desert. This down current, like an up-down breeze, trains the watery droplets exhaled and drives them into an air collector under the person. The U.S. nebulizer may also contain a light saline solution as ocean water that may be more efficient in inoculating the viruli. In underseat air collectors, several air sterilization processes may be applied in order to produce a high protection factor in the range of negative 100 decibels. The air coming down is warmed to about 200 degrees Celsius and evacuated through an air spike nozzle all along the boundaries of the airspace, forming a hot air current 3. The volume flow for the hot air is bigger by 5/3 than boundaries for the airspace, forming a hot air current 3. That for the cold air, due to gas expansion, it is collected in the above space. If the mass flow is equal, the atmospheric boxing effect 1 is obtained, and this has the role of aerodynamically sealing the volume. More, the larger PM watery droplets entering the hot airflow evaporates, increasing their buoyancy and being trained by the hot air. The above the space air is sterilized again and evacuated or recycled 28-29. As a supplementary protection measure of UVC light, 4 is applied through a trough parallel to the aero spike nozzles and has the role to sterilize any germ getting lost in the hot airflow. The risk is not so high as long around the tables there is double flow, one from the customer and one from his or her partners having UV radiation in between. Some electronic monitor table may have the automatic sneeze detection and 2 POOF 5 guns are firing at an angle, producing an air pressure wave that stops at fast-moving droplets and reintroduces them into a downwards flow in order to be collected and sterilized. Exiting gas flow may be collected above, sterilized, and flushed outside, or may be restored and recirculated, retaining a part of the heat, the thermal pump that is used 6. Supplementary to this feature, aerosol therapy 7 may be applied using supplementary gas bottles or other substances with medical and therapeutic effect. This is a full detail into the lateral hot gas current produced using an air spike technology. The idea is to tune the nozzle such that the jet remain narrow and climb vertically straight into a collection nozzle. The adjustments are done by adjusting their inner space, moving the hot spike up or down. The aerospike laminar nozzle is an important component in protection, and its good operation in creating the atmospheric boxing relies on the balance of mass flows between the input cold gas and the output aerospike jets. More or less gas inserted into one point will disturb the flow. Excess of gas will find other unwanted paths to escape the atmospheric box, being a potential viruli carrier. This is for the short summary of a process and equipment used to provide advanced protection to a person sitting at a table modulus. The air in the intake is filtered, brought at the right temperature and humidity, and some therapeutic gases may be added in the flow. Some water vapors are added that evaporate, cooling down the flow that reaches customer's head at right temperature and humidity. Vortex movement is initiated from the exit fan fins, making the airflow move towards with radial increasing rotational speed, and is collected under the customer, heated, passed through a catalytic burner, and is applied to an air spike nozzle that sends it up to a collector nozzle that passes through a sterilization unit, heat pump, and flushes it out or recirculates. On the boundaries are placed a hot air and UV current that further kills air viruli. Advanced systems may have sneeze detection and poof guns that fire two pressure wave jets that interfere with sneezing transport, stopping it and making possible training it down into sending airflow. A 4-deck prismatic construction is made of having technology spaces between the two decks near the floor and those placed above in the C area, which also holds the necessary equipment. The prism angle is cut at 90 or 60 degrees in order to form a table for 4 people as shown in Area D, or for 6 people as an assembly of such tables as shown in Area E. The table is also a fraction and has connecting clips around for fast connectivity. The table modulus in Area C has a customer sitting at his table at the part of the table, and cold air from above is surrounding him, trapping all exhalation and carrying it under the floor in the technological compartment. All the modulus is surrounded by UVC current and has sensors for boundary infringement that stops both UV and hot air on that area, while alerting the customer that some confinement protection barriers have been infringed. The table is delivering about negative 50 decibels in protection factor that adds to a nearby segment, and together it drives about 100 decibels that is at the very beginning of the low risk structure. The table in Area D is made of 4 modules with a 90-degree angle joined together that it has in the center room for the robotic waiter carousel that delivers food and drinks directly from a kitchen inside an antiseptic atmosphere. The modules may be combined square rectangular tables, 1, 2, 3, 4, and may as well in hexagonal tables and other oval shapes. Robotic service computerized communication adds to the level of safety. The same knowledge may be applied in round tables for cafeteria shown in Area F with a single occupancy, or Area G with a double occupancy, where physically consistent shields are altered with aerodynamic shields. In Area H is presented a version for bar sitting and drinking and eventually for eating. In order to assure reasonable protection of about negative 40 decibels in close proximity, a solid transparent glass shield was introduced in between handling cold air and hot air. To have a source of cold sterilized fresh air jet nozzles will blow over the head and mouth of the customers from above like on an airplane. In rest, about the same structures as for the table where the hot and UV is overlapped with an optical barrier that temporarily blocks the hot air and UV to allow glass toasts and cup contact mode to keep customers happy and safe at the same time, preventing them from a virus sharing and from burns from hot air and UV. Stadium conferencing and safe-like seating. Stadiums and amphitheater sitting presented in REAI will also be difficult places to provide safety. If no mask requirement is imposed due to singing and shouting habits the public wants to perform there. In these conditions, a negative 40 decibel may be obtained with hot air barriers all around the sitting that goes up in the air. The problem is the power consumption that becomes higher by a factor of 10 in the strong ventilation system, able to provide a flow of about 10 cubic meters per H per seat at about 200 degrees Celsius, 1/2 kilowatt per seat per H at a minimum. In the closed spaces as amphitheaters, the heat accumulates at the ceiling and has to be removed. That requires a dedicated ventilation system. The system is presented here because it is technologically possible, but it is not economically justified. And instead, we propose wearing a full transparent mask with vacuum drain system for exhaled air that may allow gentle shouting and pushes the safety up, and a protection factor of about negative 150 decibels is presented in Figure 3 as a BCD version of synergistic protection. The simplest form of protection is simply to change the gradient direction and blow fresh air from the down upwards. If they will use the double cycle system based on the Virga effect in atmospheric boxing, they will provide an ultra-safe environment with about negative 100 decibels protection factor. Medical practitioners, beauty shop, and dental shops are at high risk for virus transmission due to proximity of the patient that allows a contagious patient or customer to infect the practitioner in less than 1 minute, because the hot exhalation goes up directly into the face of the practitioner who inhales it through his or her mask. An aerodynamic system was developed based on directed air current that blows a mild wing less than 1 meter per second between the practitioner above and the customer patient, making a patient exhalation deflect toward a vacuum absorber and never reaching the practitioner's head is seen. In Area A is shown a beauty shop example that also matches hair salons, nails, eyes, vision, dental, clinical practice, etc. that requires close contact with the customer. In the case case shown in the picture during a Botox injection is shown that an exhalation of 2 liters at a concentration of 10,000 droplets per cc rises, diffusing and diluting in 20 seconds into a 6 liters at about 3,000 droplets per cc, and reaches and surrounds the head of a practitioner at a volume of 10 liters and a concentration of 1,000 droplets per cc, from which she inhales 2 liters, having inside about 2 million virus entities, enough to get her contagious in about 3 to 5 days for up to 10 days. When she gets symptoms and sick medical care may infect 2 customers per age for about 5 days, giving a total of 90 people. She will learn that she is positive towards the end of next week. Meanwhile, she stays at home with the initiative due to her main symptom of fatigue and lack of oxygen, or may infect another bunch of people, but tracing is possible at her office. Unfortunately, customers are not so reliable, and about 1,000 people may be infected in 2 weeks, from which, without cell phone GPS Wi-Fi tracking, 500 will be lost as secondary spreaders, and a pandemic will appear. Aerodynamic protection systems. The scenario may be easily avoided if an air current at speed less than 1 meter per second flow perpendicular on their eye contact direction as shown in Area B, where a dentist is treating a patient. A 2-fan box is used to produce the clean, cold air wind along the patient from head down towards an absorption funnel that takes the air and sterilizes it, throwing it outside or recirculating in the room. The system is able to provide about -30 and -50 decibels in protection factor, to which the mask and respiratory system adds, making the protection factor better than 80 decibels. If continuous airflow from a safe source is used, the protection factor is over 100, allowing a practitioner to treat any patient and remain safe and sound. The system may also be used in hospitals as Area C shows, and may be portable associated to the end. Waiting rooms and moving onto the hallways is another problem. Inside potentially contaminated area and one surgical mask with lots of leakage, or the use of synergistic solution in the class BCD. On the hallways, one may get a continuous flow mask if and only if he knows where the safe to exhale in air from is, for which a little chances to get it right. Therefore, will place in a protection factor of around 50 decibel, as his respiratory system may provide as Area D shows, or use an ABCD synergistic solution as shown in Figure 4, that for sure will provide a protection factor better than -120 decibels. As known from statistics, lungs are among first organs attacked by COVID-19 and much other respiratory disease and suffer deterioration due to air pollution. Lung lavage comes as a practical solution for fast lung refurbishment and medical treatment if it will be done with less patient invasion that requires patient anesthesia and connection on various life support machines. More, the present technology uses salty water that is not properly extracted from lungs, and much of it remains to be eliminated via circulatory system because the patient is sitting at horizontal position. In patient for an aircraft simulator, we had the cockpit rotating in all possible manners, being on top of an articulated arm with 6 degrees of freedom. That might be more than enough to rotate the patient as a bottle and make the liquid inside alveoli drain naturally outside. The proposed solution is derivative from the flight system inertial simulator, where cockpit is rotating in all directions. The airspace patient was designed for multiple pilots interacting in a secure airspace from remote locations for training and certification purposes. It was observed that the features of the cockpit may be easily used to improve the lung lavage procedure if installing a patient bed in the cockpit and renouncing it to 3D acceleration simulation, remaining only with gravitational component as main force. The cockpit installed on a moving arm contains a seat, pilot, and equipment simulating the cockpit of the desired airplane, in total having the weight of about 500 kg that is to be supported by the arm. These features make the replacement seat with the hospital bed easy and being enough force into the arm to hold all necessary medical equipment. The device shown in Figure 8 does not bring any new medical procedure, but creates a possibility for medical staff to develop innovative technology treatments able to lavage the lungs, treat disease, and restore the lungs as they were before incident or better. The idea is to partially fill the alveoli with liquid in a 4-stage session, first to clean the lungs from mucus and other sediments, then to rinse as to assure the perfect cleanup, apply medication to heal the lungs, and apply lung therapy to improve the overall performance, everything being done under quality assurance protocols. The procedure is designed to use a reduced amount of liquid, about 10% or less in the lungs' low volume, in order to reduce the stretching in the alveoli walls due to liquid's weight, and to rotate the patient's body, such as the liquid to drain gravitationally out of any alveolar space inside the drainage tubules, carrying with them the insoluble fractions of lung deposits and residues. US vibration sounds and are used to shake the walls and to increase the agitation in order to improve the washing and rinsing process. Gas and liquid therapy is supposed to be applied before and after lung gas exchange efficiency is measured in order to certify the treatment. New drug and substances have to be developed in order to make this procedure the most efficient to treat any pneumonia-like case or to heal and restore lungs in older exposed people. Physiological prevention, nutrition, and other things that people can do cheaply to much reduce the symptoms, etc., because the medical professional is not yet into prevention except vaccines and what is complementary needed to prevention and mitigation. The engineering is upfront tool mitigation is the real situation society is confronted with until vaccines, which are not 100%, have side effects, take time to be effective, and not a panacea, but hopefully better. Different solution with a vaccination, as statistics show, far more people are asymptomatic due to very low level of symptoms than are becoming seriously sick. Firstly, Many seriously sick are old and the immune system degenerates with age. Therefore, they might need to boost the immune system without disturbing it. There are basic common sense recommendations like get more sleep, exercise far more in order to have a low cholesterol blood and diet because COVID-19 enters through cholesterol fat. Stay hydrated, high liquid intake including green tea, eating foods, taking supplements that thin the blood. Have a high blood level of vitamin D and vitamin C to reduce congestion in the lungs. In some cases, take NAC that helps with body synthesis glutathione to prevent premature aging of the cells. Sulfur-containing food as broccoli, food supplements that other produce NO, which is massively healing, including beetroot juice and arugula salad. Also take in adequate zinc and selenium, magnesium, and low-sugar fruits, vegetables, especially those with quercetin as apples, honey, raspberries, onions, red grapes, cherries, citrus fruits, and green leafy vegetables and onions. There is unclear about how the above-mentioned nutrition may impact a particular COVID-19 infection response, being aware that many mutations appeared in SARS-CoV-2 with 5 classes and almost 50 types of viruli, with various aggression intensity and body symptom distributions, but it may have all sorts of other health-related benefits. There is a large variety of virus, bacteria, and biogerms having a mixed transmission via aerosols and contact that can be stopped without discrimination by the enhanced protection system that was presented. For large bacteria and germs with dimensions over 300 nm, the things that are easier because there's particle magnitude inside the retention rate for HEPA filters. SARS-CoV-2 by its dimensions of about 100 nanometers were challenging for filters because dry COVID viruli have an infinite survival time in clean, dark environment, and the only way to destroy the viruli is by chemical interaction or exposure to energetic photons as UV light, X, and gamma rays, and of course energetic moving nuclear particles. Higher temperature over 150 C also damages the viruli by thermal excitation, making the viruli react chemically with itself and lose functionality. On the right side there is presented the efficiency of various filters as a function of particle magnitude, and the left red line extrapolation shows that the best filter, MERV20, has under 10% efficiency in retaining SARS-CoV-2, 100 nanometers big, and SARS-CoV-1, 40 nanometers in magnitude. Therefore, other methods have to be used in addition to filters. This slide shows various virus shapes from a lot over 100,000 species. Filters cannot stop viruses riding on aerosols, nor N95 that stops 95 out of 101 micron particulates to pass through the shown picture above. COVID-19 has a virus about 100 nanometers, and riding on a spherical droplet that may be 1/2 micron large. It is like throwing a basketball hoop with a volleyball or golf ball. Everything that is over passes through. The large number of victims among medical personnel proves this. Figure 24 shows that N95 is not efficient enough for this virus, but it may be improved if impregnated with a salty solution that crystallizes on its fibers, making the interspaces smaller and more attractive for watery droplets. In fact, when a watery droplet made of extacporated mucus carrying viruses lands on a salt crystal, it melts it, releasing ionic free radicals in solution that attack the virus, dismantling or disabling it. Meanwhile, the water evaporates, salt recrystallizes, sealing the dead virus in place inside a larger crystallite over 1 micron possible to be retained by mask. That makes a big difference for a mask that is ineffective by design to protect the carrier against nanoparticulates as N95 is. In this image, we make a brief analysis on how protection factors to different modules used in synergetic protection vary when virus dimensions decreases, let's say from COVID-19 to influenza or SARS-CoV-1. In the top left is shown an N95 mass protection factor that falls from negative 13 decibels as COVID-19 falls from negative 5 to 2 as influenza, when it is worn correctly with no leakage. When it is worn as usual basically does not matter because in both cases it provides little personnel protection. The efficiency loss is true for all filters even though in HVAC where a MERV14 falls from negative 20 decibels to negative 5 decibels, but UV light maintains its antiseptic properties, even becomes more efficient to smaller viruli because they require less photons that get damaged significantly. The vacuum drain tube is also affected by the size reduction inside sterilization filters, but the reduction is small due to other protective features embedded. The principle of creating a vertical viruli concentration gradient where fresh air is above while used, exhaled air is deposited at ground level after being cooled at an environment temperature to cut out its buoyancy remains in force, all protective factors remain unchanged. The individual protection system is affected by the filters, each losing about 10 decibels, and finally the overall protection is cut in half, becoming negative 25 decibels at about negative 45 decibels, but still is good enough, and many times over the actual best N95s. Based on our scientific analysis, the synergistic protection terminates any pandemic less than 3 weeks if the entire community wears it coherently because it relies on aerodynamics, photonics, chemistry, and air filtration. In the fact, blocks the first stage of airborne transmission from lung to lung and lung to skin, containing the infection at the source if and only if the controls are set in the proposed solution in green curve. If a community uses the system, need for vaccination decreases, giving time to medical units to study and come with a flow less vaccine, with a minimal collateral damage and symptoms that may be applied at all without stress as now. Today, the only hope is to put in vaccination to stop pandemic in those nations who forgot or ignored the basic pandemic controls, which moves with warp speed, 1/10 of a normal speed, because it's coiled around a spool going back and forth many times uselessly. Simply because this is a big business for Big Pharma, which pays back the politicians and is about what people hope. Dodge pandemic with $1 cloth in the snout and an injection on taxpayer money and are able to pay with their lives to have this for free. From scientific point of view, a pandemic control resembles a nuclear reactor control, except it is a little bit more complicated, having the many levers one may have to pull or push in order to maintain it under control. For simplicity, we define the total reactivity R as a linear combination of particle reactivity given by transfer function that converts the linear control position into a position of an equilateral hyperbola. That gives the particle reactivity. For convenience, we set this at 40%, giving a unitary reactivity, while 100% makes and nullifies combination. We have previously analyzed how US and China set their controls compared to our proposed configuration based on the learning curve that US was expected to follow, but it picked an opposite way with an ultra-high cost. On the right side, the triple integral calculates a volume that is proportional with the competence of authorities in command. For US, competence level is very low, under 50%. The controls picked by the US belong in a virtual space and alternate reality, while time to end COVID-19 pandemic is about 2 years, time in which 90% of the population will be infected and those who will recover gain a transitory immunity, among other things. The US action cost is for 2020 is about 21 million people infected and about 360,000 dead, at an economic cost of 30% of GDP and counting. Predicted at the time at the end of 21 to be recorded about 60 million people infected and about 1 million deaths, and about the same amount vaccinated, making multiplication rate fade, except the possibility that new administration to change the course and follow lessons learned. China picked a totally different approach using totalitarian state advantage, their control setting being defined by the blue curve with a competence level high near 75%, and they terminated the pandemic in 2 months at a cost of 10% of its GDP recovered, 80,000 people infected and under 10,000 deaths. Chinese approach is very near the proposed approach, based on a learning curve and the patented methods presented before, able to stop the pandemic in 3 weeks if the controls are set according to a green curve, where the competence level is about 85% with minimal cost, under $100 billion invested in the protection equipment. That finally turns out to be an economic stimulus. If lesson learned approach, as proposed, was followed in the U.S. without the technology presented here, the losses will be counted under 40,000 people infected and about 1,000 deaths, and everything that was recorded above these numbers may be considered manslaughter and reckless leadership. From the very beginning up to today, at 1 year from the first case, the usage of masks have not been explained too clearly to public, and with high level of ignorance and alternative realities being hunted by conspiracy theory, it's very easy to politicize the subject. Some paid dearly, but very few realize what happened to them. In the last 40 years of U.S. world military domination, when U.S. became the world's kraken, the idea that some calamity might happen inside continental U.S. based on a chemical or bioagent was erased from Americans' brains, and they were so unprepared in front of COVID-19. In a multi-layered tribal society as us today, telling that wearing a mask will protect others may have acted as a social deterrent. Explain that the threat does not come from outside, as in the case of Fukushima incident, but from other infected asymptomatic contagious person that is unknown, may have also produced some social aberrations. The fact that one have to wear a mask as a courtesy for others and use it similar to their own use of car headlight beams en route during night, where putting the mask on is reducing the spit range from 10 feet down to less than half a feet, might look too complicated to explain to the public and to people in charge of public protection and emergency response. Therefore, FIMA and CDC made general statement, wear a mask all over. Now is the most complicated part of the knowledge. Masks are filters, and if they are low quality, they have low protection efficiency. But these types of masks are leaking, and when at least 10%, it reduces the protection efficiency to under 10%. When a mask has many layers and offers good protection, it is hard to breathe through, and a part of respiration will take part via leaking paths. Therefore, a compromise have to be made between filter protection factor and easiness of breathing through without leaks. The chart on the right shows the virus multiplication factor R is a function of mask protection factor and percentage of population wearing a mask, and showed that China and New Zealand were able to reach the limit near stopping pandemic, while USA is somewhere in the middle of the chart, having the COVID thrive. The content in the slide was totally kept secret for the American people, and there are following ideas to remember. With mask on or without a mask, a person needs to breathe the same amount of air. If a person is contagious, the exhaled air forms a dangerous bioplume, remaining in the near vicinity of the head, being formed by aerosolized watery droplets carried by air currents where viruli remained active for weeks. The mask does not retain all and is showed by before N95 leaves to pass 5% of 0.3 microns and almost 95% of 0.1 micron. Even if the person disappears from a spot, the plume remains and is driven by air currents. Therefore, you like it or not, you have to deal with it in order to prevent the healthy person breathe inside it and get infected. First, one may move out of the way using ascending or descending air currents. Secondarily, viruli have to be killed ASAP because otherwise they will be active for weeks and infect any person or animal inhaling in that area. The best is to configure building HVAC system to sterilize the air and use UVC light and antibacteriological filters and to configure air currents inside the room inside a clean room. This is what government have to transmit and teach public as common knowledge, giving them enough information on how to protect themselves. Supporting the expenses to introduce on larger scale that patented solutions might have driven to a 100 billion stimulus package, and after 1 month implementation, the economy may have run normally without social distancing and without any lockdown. When I realized in February that no lesson was learned, I started to call local and state authorities to inform them that CDC norms were incomplete at best, and in their race at the illusory vaccine, big business of big pharma, they forgot the hierarchy of pandemic control. The figure will show the main direction of emails and phones remained unanswered properly. Just a formal answer was received from a few, but for the majority was an automatic answer from a trash folder. What else a politician email may be, because the president, they are interested in big stuff. I mean stuff to profit themselves, and they are about the same no matter what party they belong to. The only real interest in the population is during fundraising campaigns. The people managers, medical centers, had the same disinterested attitude and were used to follow the chain of command without asking questions or connecting the dots, mainly interested in checking out some safety boxes to be able to make some bucks. In January, I communicated with Chinese on the probability of using cell phone and image identification for active infection probability tracking, and they were responsive and grateful for the information. In the U.S., the freedom of press in reality does not exist. The newspapers declined the publication of more information on the subject and were happy to publish the infection and death rate only. Only after 1 year, a physician in New Jersey, after got scared, started to apply the aerodynamics and UVC protection measures in his office. There are more than 4 scientific papers published that nobody reads, and 4 patents in a booklet, but not cogent enough for U.S. authorities. In conclusion, here you are the difference between what might happen in the U.S. if the learning curve had been followed and what in reality happened. In fact, COVID and Trump put in limelight American realities, those realities of an alternative universe. Most of the population is immersed into a special exceptionalism, just words, where the education, food, lifestyle, culture, and freedoms are the best of the best, and COVID just showed off all this universe is from reality. In front of the pandemic, U.S., instead of applying this learning curve, the real science and leadership moving by a factor of 4 in the good direction, it applied arrogant, ignorant attitude moving by a factor of a few hundred in a bad direction, and with 4% of the world population, U.S. provided 25% of the U.S. casualties, being by a factor of 6 dumber than the planetary average. Yes, we put America first, but we lost the leading edge position. The sentence, they fully deserve it, seems to be inappropriate, but is the cruel reality, because that is what they paid for and acted for, and they got it. Because COVID was not a hoax, enacting in alternative facts and realities makes one pay dearly in real reality, and it shows. We did our best to prevent that, but unfortunately nobody was interested enough to listen and applied. With $100 billion only in stimulus to follow the smart way, proposed the U.S. might have enjoyed minimum casualties, a 5% growth in GDP instead of a 10% loss, and a surplus of $4 trillion with no inflation. And everything have to be aggravated by the disintegration of the Soviet Union that made the U.S. lose the reality compass as part of a decadence of Western civilization. Or it's just a wake-up signal.